Hey, you whiskey fans. Have you heard of an independent bottler? I imagine you have, but I think they're very interesting and I want to talk a bit about it. So thankfully, while checking the footage, I recognized, oops, I got a giant stain on my shirt. Hey guys, I'm not dirty. Well, I kind of am, but I just finished a mash. Sorry about that. Should have looked at it a little. Should have looked at myself in the mirror before I thought, let me have a glass and talk about it. Let's get to it. So essentially, I'm torn. I love distilleries. My hobby is a distillery. I make whiskey. I produce it. I've been offered multiple times people buying barrels. And it's an interesting concept because it's kind of easy money. It means that right away I can sell a product, make money. Somebody else deals with aging, taking care of it, the maintenance, the bottling, the labeling, you mention it. And I just kind of make a little lump sum of money. So it sounds great. And I think distilleries are torn between this concept as well. Because of course you need to make enough whiskey to sell and to bottle and to make whatever, I'm just gonna grab something, make whatever generic whiskey you're producing and always need to produce because every bar has a cocktail or they have a recipe that requires exactly that whiskey and it's not going to taste the same with a different one. It makes sense. For them, you got to keep making the same. And as a distillery, you have a profile. You've got a certain type of flavor and aroma, things that fit into that, or whiskey that you've produced that fits into that image. And every so often, you might have a whiskey which is just too good to give up, but maybe a little bit too different. And it doesn't quite fit what you're doing or what you're working on. Enter independent bottler. Now, these are pretty interesting concepts here because an independent bottler doesn't do much except buy whiskey and bottle it. There are different variations of this. Like, for instance, we have Michael Cuveur. I hope I said that correctly. And he's a pretty interesting case. I mean, I think most people would love to do what he does. Essentially, he is able to buy new make whiskey from his contacts in Scotland, bring it into France, and then he ages them and does some pretty magical things. And at the end, they look something like this. Very sought after, very interesting whiskeys that he's producing, and very cool stuff. But not everybody is able to do that. In fact, very few, if not less and less, are able to buy whiskey as a new make and age it themselves. Most people are just buying it from a bottler or buying it from a distillery and then bottling it. That's in the case of this guy here, which is quite an interesting whiskey because essentially what we're dealing with here is a 20-year-old whiskey. Now, independent bottlers can usually do some quite interesting things because they own the product and they're very, let's say they know their target market and their audience. They're doing things which are a little bit different. And one of those things being, especially in this case, being able to play with different concepts and names. So for instance, at Uncharted, every whiskey is named after a rock song, or let's say influenced by a rock song. So here we have Park Life. And this is a 20-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey distilled at a Highland distillery. Well, there's quite a few Highland distilleries, but let's see if the bottle gives us any more hints. By the way, I should also mention it's been distilled in 2004, bottled 2025. So super recently. Right now it's 2026. And when we get to the back, let's talk whiskey. Join the conversation in the Friends of Uncharted Whiskey Facebook community, newbies, veterans, and all in-betweens. Welcome for whiskey chat, events, exclusive tastings and news, natural colors, unchill filtered, Uncharted Whiskey, limited edition. What's more interesting on the other side is it says a walk in the park. This is a stunning expression of a single malt from a rather famous distillery in the very far north of Scotland, aged for 20 years using refilled ex-bourbon wood. And the result, a striking meddling with notes of buttery popcorn, golden syrup, and heather, filled from ex-bourbon casks. I like buttered popcorn, and it's a 20-year-old whiskey. On the other side of it, we've got stuff like this. These are also friends of the channel, and Volunch are two Swiss guys which import in some pretty good whiskey. I've got quite a few of it back here, and I go through quite a bit of their stuff. Also interesting, because this one does not have their branding or marketing, but they're both independent bottlers. You see, a bottler can buy direct from the distillery, or they can buy from somebody who sources these barrels for them. In this case, it's Douglas Lane. And Douglas Lane, you can look them up. There's quite a lot of information. It can be a full channel about everything that they do and all the different bottlings. But essentially, you can buy from a whiskey barrel handler, Douglas Lane. They'll help you stick everything in a tin, label it, put all the nice little things that you need, and make it ready for you to sell. You don't have to worry about finding a bottle, labeling it, and doing all that stuff yourself. Now, that's not always the case. There's variations. But what I really like about this is, for starters, you usually get a lot more fun. Whereas a distillery might be very used to and have their own, I'm just pulling out a very standard bottle here, nothing against Four Roses, but this bottle here is very typical. They know what they're going for, they know who their audience is, and if you go for a more fancy Four Roses or a more fancy, like I got a Woodford back here that has some very typical basic stuff, but this Woodford had a tag on it, has even less information, but it is a collector, or a little bit more of a unique release. This is the batch 124.7 proof. Idea here being, independent bottlers usually tell you more about their whiskey. It's kind of more interesting because they are going to a distillery and picking a bottle or picking a barrel, not because it's the typical distillery's stuff, usually because it's a little bit different, and too different to where the distillery can't justify using it themselves, and they think it can be used in better hands somewhere else. Again, I produce Too Little Whiskey. I baby every barrel, and I do whatever I need to do during the aging to make sure that it's going to be something that fits my profile. But if you're a large distillery, like some unnamed, very, very North Highland distilleries, then hey, every time or every so often when you find a super rare, super special, super old barrel, you might be better off selling the whole barrel versus trying to make a whole brand and a label and marketing and pushing it out there. Somebody else can do that for you. Now, why is it that some whiskeys, like this one here, like this one is an Ardmore, can specify what distillery it came from, and others cannot? This is the preference of the distillery and the independent bottler. Sometimes when you buy a barrel, the distillery tells you, hey, you can use my name. You can use maybe the logos or some of the different text or the wording from the distillery. And other times the distillery has either a policy against this, or part of the transaction just did not include these rights, and you can't do that. Now, let's kind of get into why you might prefer, or maybe why I sometimes prefer, actually nowadays more and more, independent bottlings to a actual full-blown whiskey from a distillery. In my perspective, and this is just my perspective, independent bottlers are often people which love whiskey. They are whiskey fanatics, whiskey fans, people who are inspired by not necessarily the creation or the production of the whiskey itself, but the flavors of it, the stories. And they're more interested in experiencing and sharing these experiences than they are producing a whiskey on their own. They're kind of like treasure hunters. They're not the company which paid to get this treasure on a ship to sail it from site A to site B and the ship goes down. They're the people which are looking for that ship when it sank. And when they find that treasure, instead of keeping it for themselves, they'll usually bottle it and provide it for the world to try and see and experience for themselves. Now, what's also very cool and what I really appreciate is usually price-wise, they're really good. So Volunch, Ballpark, and they got some pretty unique special whiskeys, stuff which I go through. They're around 100 Swiss francs, plus minus. And this guy here, which again is a 20-year-old whiskey, 20 years old. That's an old whiskey. That's up there with, like, in the barrel, probably one of the oldest stuff out here. But this was like $130. So it's not very expensive. And for what you get coming out of it, oh man, it's good. I should grace it with a cleaner glass, but as long as the glass doesn't have particles sitting in it or anything kind of crazy. Oh man, I don't care. On the nose, butter, creamy, super rich, almost like a banana note. It's an interesting whiskey. You can kind of see it there. Other than the glass being super dirty, not too much color. Ex-bourbon barrels. We don't know, sadly, how many times they've been filled. I imagine this is a batch. There's no barrel number on there. And what that means is if it's a batch, 20 years was the youngest whiskey that went in there. There's probably some stuff in there that was possibly older. I didn't do a lot of research on it. Sorry, just got this bottle today. But super interesting. Also, I like to note, like in your mouth, it hits a little bit different. It's very present in the front tip and like mid palate. And then come to the back of your throat. Usually where I tend to find more bourbons, especially kind of oak forward whiskeys, they kind of tingle or resonate a little bit in the back of your mouth. For a 20-year-old whiskey, not very bitey, pretty smooth, really, really rich, creamy. I think the tasting notes were spot on. I'm not finding a lot of fruit. There is a little bit of dryness, as I would expect on a whiskey so old, but delicious. Very good. And on the other side here, I have this one here, being Ardmore. It's a little bit peaty, so I want to kind of save this for the second. But again, these are whiskeys that if you had the classical Ardmore or if you had the classical Distillery releases next to them, these wouldn't quite make sense. Usually they're a bit different, they're a bit special. It's a barrel that didn't quite fit in with the bunch. And instead of it getting thrown into a gigantic blend and mast, we get to experience it. I mean, if you think about it, how often do you find a single barrel, or how expensive is a single barrel whiskey when it's coming direct from the distillery? Usually kind of pricey. But if it comes from an independent bottler, a liquor store, a club, it's priced way better. So this raises for me the question, where and when should you buy a bottle from an independent bottler, from a distillery? And I would say there's no right answer to that other than, hey, it's what you like. Hopefully you get a chance to taste it before you buy it and it speaks to you. It's different, it's unique, it fits the mood or the vibe, whatever it is, whatever the reason. Just because the label or the brand is different, just because it doesn't come from a named distillery, doesn't mean it's bad. And sometimes, like both of these guys here, it could be a great bargain. And I'd even argue most of the time, as they are a little bit smaller, they have different communities and clubs and Facebook groups where you can actually talk to the people, feel and get to know them, not just the whiskey. Whereas a distillery nowadays, or big distilleries, are usually big and corporate, and you're never really getting a real answer from anybody. Independent bottlers, depending, I mean, Douglas Lane is huge, or bigger, but most of the time, Valanche, Uncharted, you can probably reach out to them and quickly say hello, figure out what's new, and get to know the people bringing you some pretty special whiskey. With that, cheers to you, whatever you're liking today. Thanks for hanging out.